Today, we want to talk about how to win an argument without losing a soul. That's going to require us doing a few things. We're going to have to talk about what an argument is, what an argument isn't, different types of arguments, and we'll look at, let's say, 7 bad arguments, also known as logical fallacies. And then I want to look at 5 tips for constructive discourse with someone who disagrees with us. That's what we're going to do. So let's begin by talking about what an argument isn't. About 13 years ago, I was living in San Diego with my wife. And that's the last time I mentioned a city or state for the entirety of the talk. Thanks, dude. And my kids would always get up at an ungodly hour, as kids tend to do. And they burst into my room this one morning, both Liam and Avila, who are so beautiful, I love them. And they came in, and I said, "Oh gosh, guys, it's way too early. Please go outside. Just go and play. What should we do?" And here's what I said. I'm like, "I don't know, but we'll play a game. Whoever stays out the longest wins. And you can judge me until you're a parent, okay? And then you can eat humble pie." And so they walked out, and the door had barely shut when Liam opened the door and said, "What do we win?" I hadn't thought that through. I said, "What? What do we win?" And then my wife, who up until this point had been comatose, raised her exhausted head from the pillow and said, "Candy." I said, "Candy? I know we're not great parents, but it's 6. She said, "No, it's not real candy. It's vitamins. They bubble on their tongue. They don't know the difference. Idiots, you know?" So they went out and they started to play. But within minutes, they started bickering. And if you've ever heard children bicker, it's enough to make you want to scratch your eyes out and throw your eyeballs at children. Did too, did not, did too, did not, that kind of thing erupted, and it's just the worst. But I think that's what most of our culture thinks an argument is. It's bickering, it's fighting, it's disagreeing, it's being disagreeable. And if you want proof of this, just open up Google and type in argument, click images, and what you see is not people discussing ideas, but 2 people usually red in the face, grabbing each other by the shirt, shouting at each other, and this sort of thing. And so because of this, I think many Christians, sometimes you'll hear it, they'll say, we really shouldn't argue with people, we should just tell our story, which I think is really disappointing. Because it seems to me that if I evangelize somebody, or if I say something like, God exists and he loves you and he sent his son Jesus Christ to die and to rise from the dead for your sins, yada, yada, and if the person is a thinking person, they'll say something like, well, why should I believe that? Or how do you know that's true? If at that point you're to answer them helpfully, you're going to have to give them reasons to think something. And that is what an argument is. It's giving reasons to think something is true or is not true. I got 2 fun verses from the scriptures that back me up here. The first comes from Acts 17:1. This is Paul going into the synagogue. It says, Paul went in, as was his custom, and for 3 weeks he argued with them from the scriptures. And, you know, if you have like this wrong understanding of argument, you'd be like, Paul, let it go. You know what I mean? Just chill. 3 weeks. But I like this one more. Here he is in the same chapter, arguing with people in the marketplace. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him, and he saw that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who chanced to be there. So he's just hanging out, waiting for you as you buy your milk and eggs and bacon, and not bacon, but whatever first century Jews bought, and then he's jumping out and he's arguing with you. So we want to argue, and we want to argue well. Okay, let's talk about what's required for a good deductive argument. So a good deductive argument needs to have clear terms, true premises, and valid logic. And if a deductive argument has these things, and a deductive argument is an argument that argues from at least one universal premise to a particular conclusion. The classic example is, all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And if you want to take issue with that conclusion, that Socrates is mortal, you're going to have to say that one of the premises was wrong, or that I'm equivocating on the terms, or that conclusion doesn't follow the premises according to the laws of logic. So let's look at each of those three things. Clear terms, what did I say? Yeah, clear terms, true premises, valid logic. So I'll give you an example of an argument where I equivocate on the terms. And what that means is I'm using a term in two different senses. Okay, so for example, if I said, premise one, all feathers are light. Premise two, that which is light is not dark. Therefore, no feathers are dark. So that conclusion doesn't follow at all because I've equivocated on the term light. In the first premise, what did I say? I meant it to mean weight, and in the second premise, I used the term light to mean that which enables us to see. You see? You're welcome. And old dad jokes, or almost old dad jokes, are based on equivocation. And as a dad of 4 children, buckle up, because here's a couple. And if you don't laugh, I'm just going to keep telling them to you until you laugh to my satisfaction. That was pretty good. Let's move on. Okay. No. Let's think. What has 4 wheels and flies? A garbage truck. Yeah, you know what? Screw you, okay? I didn't need your pity. All right, here's another one. So, 3 old people at an old folks' home, hanging out, minding their own business, not hurting anybody, eating breakfast. Remember the joke? Okay, let's say there's an American couple, an English couple, and we may as well pick on the Australian couple. So the American bloke says to his wife, pass me the honey, honey. You're welcome. The English fella says to his wife, pass me the sugar, sugar. And the Australian fella says to his wife, pass me the tea bag. And that is funny because I'm equivocating on the word okay. I'll stop with this. I'll stop with this if you promise to appreciate it. I told it to Peter Kraft once and he laughed really loudly. So if you don't like it, it's your fault. Right, so this fella goes to a funeral. Yeah, it's not it, there's more. And he's standing by the widow and she says to him, do you mind getting up and just saying something? So the friend gets up, and he just says one word. He says, plethora. Thank you. And he goes and he sits down and the widow just says, thanks. That means a lot. So, all right, I'm sorry. I'm having too much fun. All right, let's just move on. So, equivocation, no laughing matter when it comes to logic, I'll tell you that much. We need true premises. Premises are just steps in an argument. You can quote unquote prove anything with false premises. Like if I say all leprechauns are infallible and I am a leprechaun, therefore I am infallible, that is a logically valid argument. To say something is logically valid is to say that the conclusion does follow from the premises. It's not sound because the premises happen to be false. And then finally, you need valid logic, which is just to say that the conclusion has to follow. So if I say Ottawa is the capital of Canada and a beaver is a semi-aquatic broad-tailed rodent, therefore snow is white. This is not a good argument, even though the premises and the conclusion are all true. So all of those things have to be there. Let's look at 7 logical fallacies and give examples of them and show how we might respond. Now, hopefully, as we look at these fallacies, the goal isn't just to own people, but to realize that maybe we do this and we shouldn't do it, and maybe it'll help us look at how we think through different things. I think the first logical fallacy to talk about, because I think it's the most prevalent online, is the ad hominem fallacy, which is a Latin fancy word, which just means against the man. And the ad hominem fallacy occurs when you attack me instead of my arguments. This happened recently. I made the claim that, I made the argument that if it's always wrong to kill an innocent human being, and abortion kills an innocent human being, then abortion is always wrong. And someone told me that I had no right to talk on this since I was a white male, which was both a racist and a sexist thing to say, as well as a logical fallacy. So when we're responding to people, it's very helpful just to sort of try to pass out the person from the thing that they're saying. Very bloody difficult to do, which is partly why I quit Twitter officially. And yeah, I tell you, I made a big bloody song and dance about it on YouTube. Got to get those clicks. And then but then Twitter gives you, also known as Twitter, gives you 30 days to come back. And honestly, I think if I hadn't have made a public stink about it, I probably would have just quietly went back and went, yeah. Because when Elon Musk took over, I'm like, okay, maybe there's hope. But my pride didn't allow it. So now I heard today, someone came up and said, everyone's really angry with me on Twitter. I don't care. I'm not in that house. They can shout all they want. It's terrific. You really should quit Twitter. And you should really stop saying that St. Paul would be on Twitter. He's way smarter than you. He wouldn't be on it. Quit Twitter tonight. Okay. Number 2. The second logical fallacy we'll look at is a fancy named one. It's called self-referentially incoherent proposition. Something is self-refuting or self-referentially incoherent if upon making the statement or the argument, you refute it. So if I say, I don't speak a word of English, this is clearly a self-referentially incoherent statement because I at least speak 7 or 8. You'll have to count them for me. If somebody says, I don't believe in absolute truth, or there is no absolute truth, they are making a claim to truth, and they think that that claim is absolute. That doesn't work either. I remember leading a retreat in Donegal in Ireland. Yeah, all right, I'll let you do it, just because you came a long bloody way. It's good to have you. And a fella came up after the talk, and he went, hey, it's a decent retreat, thanks so much, but I don't believe in God. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Why don't you believe in God? And he said, because I don't believe in absolute truth. And my friend Charity, without missing a beat, said, are you absolutely sure about that? And he did this. And I watched his brain just blow up. It was beautiful. Another self-referentially incoherent claim is the following. One should only accept as true what science can show to be true. So if the scientific method cannot show that something is true, then there's no reason to think that it is true. The only problem with that is a claim to knowledge that isn't based on a scientific finding. It's a philosophical axiom that the person has begun with. So if you should not accept things unless they can be shown true scientifically, then you shouldn't believe what I just said since it can't be shown true scientifically. Here's a third fallacy, the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy occurs when you seek to invalidate a person's belief or the conclusion to an argument based on how it originated, right? So someone might say, you're only a Christian because you were raised in what used to be, or maybe a Christian area of your country, or you were raised in a Christian household. And if you weren't, then you might be something else. Or they'll say the only reason you're a Christian is because you are afraid in the face of the mystery of life, death terrifies you, and so believing in a sugar daddy up in the clouds who will give you a theme park when you're dead is comforting, and congratulations, but it's not true. But this doesn't work because the person hasn't engaged an argument. They've tried to engage your psychology. You believe because. And the reason that doesn't work is you and I might have all sorts of inadequate reasons to believe things, and those things still be true. You might believe, because you read it in a Superman comic, that the Earth is spherical. That's not a good reason for thinking that it is, but it certainly doesn't show that it's flat. Plus, this goes both ways. I might say to someone, well, the only reason you are an atheist is you were raised in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, okay, so I can offend you. There's like 3 of you. You'll be fine. You were raised in Portland, Oregon on a strictly vegan diet, and so your brain hasn't developed sufficiently to assess arguments for God's existence, right? That's not, no, that I wasn't trying to own anybody. I was giving an example of a bad argument. Bastards. Number 4. Here's the 4th logical fallacy, and that is the red herring fallacy. A red herring, I've heard, is a fish. Apparently, the trainers of bloodhounds used to tie these smelly old fish to a chain and drag them across the path of their quarry to see if the bloodhound or dog would stay on its target or if it would be distracted and go off after the smell of the fish. So it's a good name for an argument, a logical fallacy, because this happens so often where we might be engaging a particular topic and then someone brings up something very unrelated to see if we'll go off in that direction. And it's maybe something that we do when we feel like, okay, I don't know how to answer this, so I'm just going to throw up something totally different. I remember in San Diego again, I said to my wife, I'm going to go take a nap because naps are awesome. And I had just laid down and my wife knocked on the door. She went, hey, sorry to wake you, but there are men with Bibles at the doors, and I know that really excites you. Yes! So got up and I was chatting with these beautiful Jehovah's Witness. Well, they weren't terribly attractive physically, but I'm sure they had good hearts. I'm actually not terribly sure about that either. I'm just trying to be charitable. They were decent people, probably. Maybe not. I don't know. Didn't have a long, in-depth conversation. So there were 2 men, all right? Shut up. They showed up with Bibles and we started talking about the faith. And I made an argument something like this. The only church which can trace its lineage unbroken to the time of Christ and the apostles is the Catholic Church. I forget the argument as I'm saying it, but the conclusion was that Jesus Christ established a church. The only church which can trace its lineage unbroken to the time of Christ and the apostles is the Catholic Church. Therefore, Jesus Christ established the Catholic Church. Now, if you want to take issue with that, fine. You can say it's not true that Jesus Christ established a church, or in the sense that you're talking about it. Or you might say it's just not the case, that it's only the Catholic Church, or that the Catholic Church at all can trace its lineage. You could do that to try to avoid the conclusion. But what this person said was, what about the sexual abuse crisis, among the clergy and Catholic leadership, and how could you possibly belong to a church like that? Okay, well, the problem with that, especially if you're on the receiving end, is if you think you could begin to sufficiently answer that question, you're more likely to try instead of staying on target. So I think I said something like, okay, fair enough, decent point that I'm happy to respond to later, but could you tell me what was wrong with the argument I just laid out, right? Because it could be the case that Christ established a Catholic Church, the only church that can trace its lineage unbroken to the time of Christ is the Catholic Church, and that there are really evil people in the Catholic Church, like you and me. Like, that's possible. And these 2 people who weren't Catholic, but probably evil, who knows? I didn't meet them, we didn't have a long conversation. So that doesn't work either. So that's a red herring. So I think it's really important not to get off on side issues, but try to stick to the topic at hand. Okay, here's a 5th. We've got 7 of these. A straw man argument is when one intentionally misrepresents their opponent's argument in order to more easily refute it. So if a Catholic says to an atheist, oh yeah, you believe that there was nothing and then nothing exploded and then dinosaurs showed up, like, that's just insulting and silly. And it's also like a really bad way of engaging an atheist, because that's definitely not, almost certainly, how they would explain why it is they're an atheist. So what we want to do is not straw man our opponent's arguments, we want to steel man them. That is to say, make them stronger than they can, and then see if you can refute it. And Thomas Aquinas did this so bloody well. In the Summa Theologiae, he addresses, shout out, yeah, you're welcome. It's the Prima Pars, question 2, article 3. He comes up with 2 arguments for atheism that he then responds to, which is interesting. I think I've seen as many as 12 arguments against the position he then wants to make. He has this other book called On Evil or De Malo, where he'll sometimes have 24 arguments, which he articulates against the position he wants to make and then responds to them. And as you're reading through these arguments against his position, you're like, I don't know how you're going to get out of this. These are so strong. And that's really impressive. Like if I said to you right now, give me like 5 good arguments or as good arguments as you can come up with for abortion or something like that, would you be able to do it? I think Aquinas could at least come up with some and then he would respond to them. But I think that is a sign of intellectual maturity. I think Aristotle said this, that we can entertain a person's thought without having to accept it. But here's his argument against God's existence based on evil. I'm not going to give you the answer. You can go look that one up for yourself or go, to Pints with Aquinas where we've dealt with this. But here's his argument. It seems that God does not exist because if one of 2 contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. But the word God means that he is infinite goodness. If therefore God existed, there would be no evil discoverable. But there is evil discoverable, therefore God does not exist. Now, if I was to stand you up here, give you a microphone and be like, go, answer it. I mean, it's pretty weighty, it's pretty substantive. And I think, even though we don't want to do it, and if we're on social media, we're never in the headspace to do it. But if we're engaging with people that we genuinely care about, whether it be on a university campus or at work or a family member, it really goes a long way to try to understand what they're saying and then to say it back to them to see if it's sufficient. Can you imagine how much more productive, even though more boring, our presidential debates would be? Like if Biden had to reiterate Trump's position to Trump's satisfaction or vice versa before that person was then able to respond. Again, it might not be as clickbaity mic drop moments, but is that really what we've fallen into? Is that all we care about? Number 6, false dilemmas. A false dilemma is when one presents only 2 available options, but there's more. So if I say to my daughter, okay, you can go to bed now or in 5 minutes, there are clearly more available options, Dad. I could go to bed in 7 minutes, I could stay up all night, An example that I've heard Dr. William Lane Craig give is the following, and this comes from Euthyphro's Dilemma, written by Plato. Someone might say, is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? Now, right away, you're tempted to pick a side, but if you do, you run into problems. Because if I say, well, something's good because God commands it, that seems to make the good arbitrary. God could have commanded us to hate our parents and to blaspheme, and therefore those things would have been good. Well, no, we don't want to say that. Okay, then you'll say, okay, well, God commands it because it's good. But if you say that, you make the good independent from God, something that God has to look to then issue his commands toward us. A way around this argument might be to say that God's nature is the standard of goodness, and his commandments towards us are expressions of that good nature. Okay, finally, the shotgun fallacy. Not as fancy as ad hominem or ad ignominium or any of these other names. Shotgun fallacy, where you're not shooting you're not shooting a bullet, right? You're shooting a cartridge. Why am I explaining to Americans? Okay, you get what a shotgun does. It sprays BBs or something, right? Apparently. I don't know. They still haven't let me hold one, but I love your country and I'm so glad to live here. Okay, so... no, shut up. That was cheap. It was too cheap. Don't clap for that. You should be disappointed. You should be disappointed that I stooped that low. So this is a good name for a fallacy because it means when somebody is throwing way too many objections at you and you cannot possibly respond to that person in the time available. So it's very easy to ask questions. It's so easy. It's very easy to try to tear down a position or to sneer at a position or to make a position look childish. it's a lot more difficult to answer a question or to build up an argument. And so it's very easy to say, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And how come you do this? And why do you call priest father? And what about the Eucharist? And why do you worship Mary? That's very difficult to respond to. So that's called the shotgun fallacy. And I think, and we'll bring this up in a minute, but if someone starts doing that, or if you do that to someone, what you should really do is slow down and just sort of stick to one thing at a time so that you can make some progress. Okay. All right, let's look at 5 tips for constructive discourse with someone that we disagree with. The first is so obvious, you'll roll your eyes, but listen, because you probably don't do it. Number 1, listen. Like really, listen to the person in front of you. I don't like doing it either. What I want to do is quote tweet them and drop my mic and look superior. So do you, because you're an awful person. This is a good argument for original sin, actually, right? But what we should probably do if we're sitting down with somebody who disagrees with us is to listen to them and to actually listen. I think there are 2 dead giveaways when someone's not listening. I've noticed it already at this conference. I've been guilty at it already at this conference. You're chatting with somebody, all right? That's their mouth. And you get bored. And so let's blame the other person. That's way easier. That person starts making affirming noises, but at the wrong time. So you're saying these wonderful things because you're incredible and you've got just so much truth to share. And while you're sharing these beautiful golden nuggets of wisdom, the person is going, but at the wrong time, and so you know that they're not listening. And so they're dead to me, all right? The second thing is when you look over their shoulder. You ever done that? They're talking to you, they're sharing something very meaningful about their life, and you look over your shoulder at something more interesting, and then they catch you looking away, and you know that, and you've been caught, and so you compensate with dramatic head nods, and really empathetic eyeballs. We don't like it when people don't listen to us, especially when we have things that we think are important to talk about. And if we don't like it, then the people we're engaging with wouldn't like it either, and so we should try not to do that. The second thing we should do is ask questions. Not just listen to a person's position, but ask them questions to try to fully understand it. Even if their position seems insane to you, if you care about the person, you should at least try to understand where they're coming from and where you can meet them. You can't go all the way with them, but you can say, okay, fair enough. So I'm with you here. I get that, I'm with you there, but this bit seems unclear to me, or something like that. So asking questions, not in a jerky way, just to hammer somebody with questions, but to really try to understand their position. A third thing I think we can do with somebody who disagrees with us and we're trying to win over is to ask them this question. Perhaps we're trying to tell them about the truth of Christianity or Catholicism in particular. You might say, all right, what would it take? Like, what would it take for you to become Christian, let's say? And you might say, because I could tell you what it would take for me to disbelieve in Christianity. Well, I could tell you what it would take for me to probably lose my faith in Christianity. I don't know, but I could tell you what it should take, to lose my faith. Like if the bones of Jesus would show up. Or if there were no good arguments for God's existence and really compelling arguments for atheism or something like that. So you might say to your friend, what is one thing, what would it take for you to seriously consider Christianity? And I think what that does is that it helps the person and you get down to the nub of the issue. So whereas with the shotgun fallacy, you've got like 1,000 different objections that you can't possibly respond to, saying, okay, fair enough, but what would it take for you to be like, okay, what's your strongest objection to becoming a Catholic? Or what's your strongest objection to becoming a Christian? And if that person is honest and they give you that and they want to continue the conversation, then you can focus on that thing. If that's the strongest objection, and you can sufficiently answer that, that's got to let the other person feel that maybe his or her lesser objections can also be responded to. When I was living in Ireland, I had a good friend. He was a Protestant bookseller in Letterkenny in Donegal, wonderful fella. And I said that to him, what would it take for you to become Catholic? And he said what he just couldn't understand about Catholics is that we teach that someone can potentially lose their salvation, and that he believed that once we come into a saving relationship with Christ, like we cannot forfeit that. And I pointed to several scriptures that I thought obviously taught the Catholic view. And when I showed him, and this leads us into the number 4, the fourth point, which is it's all right not to know, which I don't even believe that advice myself. Like, I hate not knowing, I feel stupid, I feel humbled, but I don't actually have to feel that way, and neither do you. Because when I presented these scriptures to this man, he said to me, I remember he said, wow, I feel like I haven't seen that before. Thank you for sharing that with me. He said, would you mind if I spent some time in the Word and I got back to you? And I was like, oh, yeah, that'd be cool, sure, yeah. Like, that guy didn't look like an idiot at all. That guy looked like a man who was more interested in the truth than just beating somebody in a bookstore over an argument. And saying to somebody like, I don't know, could I look into it and get back to you? There's no fear of being drilled with questions or pummeled with arguments you don't know the answer to, because you've just admitted that. Like, I don't know. Well, what about this? No, that's what I meant by I don't know. I got back to this fella a couple of weeks later, and he found scriptures that disagreed with mine, and so he didn't change his mind. But the point was, I thought, okay, here is a humble man who is more interested in the truth than merely winning an argument. Okay, here's the final point, and then we'll wrap up. And I want you to take a big breath when I say this, because it is genuinely, I think, relieving. You are incapable of converting anyone. You and I can give arguments for things. We can bear witness to the truth and the beauty of the Christian faith. But we are actually incapable of bringing about this sort of salvific relationship with Jesus Christ. We can perhaps remove obstacles in the way to that belief. And that's very helpful, which is why I'm a big fan of Catholic apologetics. But it's the Holy Spirit who does the converting. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 and 7 says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. I hope that that is the beginning of help to you. Thank you so much for being here. And can I just ask, how many of you, just give me a shout, are focused missionaries right now? Okay. There's probably like 8,000, but there's so many of you, that felt like 4 people. But I just wanted to say, thank you so much for what you do. I mean, college campuses today, I mean, surely it's worse than whatever Sodom had going on. So God bless you for your courage to go into these satanic places and I'm not joking, and I think very often there is a lot of demonic activity that you're encouraging. I've had folks who I'm not going to say who for, but work for these different organizations, and they say that, yeah, they're going up against witchcraft, they're going up against real idols, they're going up against people who might be possessed. So thank you for your work, whether you're with Seek or whether you're with Net Ministries or whether you're with whatever other missionary thing you're doing. We live in a day and age where it's not just difficult to be a Christian, but many people are falling away from the faith and will go to hell for all eternity unless we have the courage to continue to proclaim the gospel. And we want to make sure that once we've proclaimed it, we can engage them intellectually and respond to arguments with charity and clarity. God bless you.